And um, let's see. I think the only homework I think we talked about, we were talking about those processes, right? Did I have you draw a picture too?
No, you didn't say anything.
No,
about
just the processes.
All right, wait till we draw the picture. No, anyway. All right, yes, it's a photography class that we have to do drawings. Yes, so we're gonna go over history today though, basically. We're gonna start with the history. We're gonna do a quick history and mostly of American photography right now this week. Next week we'll go into some female photographers, and we're gonna look at all the and other countries around the world who were doing photography during those early 1800s and the middle 1800s as well. And so photography, people were experimenting with capturing pictures all around the world during that time. It's just, we're ingrained, and it was taught, we're used to thinking that everything originated in Europe, but it actually didn't. But that's where our history mainly comes from. And so that's what we're going to talk about, other places that dealt with capturing the image as well. But we'll do that a little bit next week. Today we'll look at some more of those processes. We'll look at, I didn't give you homework for taking pictures yet either, did I? You want the homework now, or do you want me to tell you the homework after we do the lecture?
Now.
Both, because I'm sure one of us is bound to forget.
That's what my last class did too. Let's tell us the homework now. Okay, so I guess let me pull it up. I've already posted it in Blackboard as well, but the homework is, let's share the screen. We're going to talk a little bit about, oops, I didn't mean to open FaceTime. I meant to open Zoom share photo. Share screen, there we go. Somebody had asked me in another class, what constitutes a good photo? So when y'all are thinking about that, what constitutes a good photo in your eyes? I'm gonna unmute everybody so that everybody can talk. I think I am, but I want everybody to unmute yourself and just, whatever you have to say it. I like to hear noise in the background.
No, one that's focused where it needs to be focused, I guess. Because sometimes it's blurry is okay.
Right. So that's a good thing. Focus where it needs to be focused. So clarity. Okay, that's a good one. Anybody else have any ideas what a good photo is?
The color or the contrast of the image that you're trying to take, like the focus.
Okay, good. So the color and the contrast. So the details in it. So initially, the first thing we do is we look at a photograph and we investigate it to try to figure out what it is, right? So that's anybody who looks at any kind of photograph or picture, just like, let's see, like looking at the screen at the the 5 of you who have your picked screens on,
Give me just a moment.
You don't realize it, but what I see is a picture. You're creating a picture of yourself, the image of yourself that you want the world to see. The people with black screens with just their name, that's the image that they want the world to see of them.
Or our cameras aren't working, like me.
I know, I'm just trying to just show a little example of, you're making a portrait, you're making a picture just by how you frame yourself. I decided to put that screen of the parking lot with those trailers in it behind me. So I've
always wondered why. Why do you like that picture with the trailers?
That's the picture of all of the stuff that was taken out of the Humanities building while they're doing the remodel.
Oh, okay.
And so I took a picture of that parking lot, and that's where I park most of the time, in that parking lot when I go to school. So I created this picture behind me. It's not lit very well. So somebody said the exposure or the brightness, because I don't have my light close enough to me to light my face very well. So it's not lit very well. The exposure is not great. And so it is all about creating that perfect exposure, that balance of light and dark in the image, and that composition of what's in the image and how it relates to the background. So the background, foreground, middle ground, is there foreground, middle ground, or background? Is there not? Sometimes it's supposed to be, sometimes it's not. I think somebody was talking about intent. what's the artist's intent for the photograph to look like? And so there's no specific right or wrong what a good photograph is, but when it comes to technical quality, yes, if it's lit okay, where you can recognize and achieve the effect that the artist wants you to do, if it's composed in a correct way to achieve the effect that the artist wants to do. So it's really all the artist's control, but it's all about making that fine line balance for understanding, letting the viewer understand your photograph. That makes a good photograph. Make sense?
Mhm.
So that's what our goal is for this class, is to learn to make good photographs. All right, and learn the process of the darkroom. Even though we're not going to be totally in the darkroom, we're going to be learning how to make good pictures anyway. Okay, good black and white and color images. So, okay, going back to the homework, because we're going to be making pictures, I wanted to go over that. There's I'm going to show a PowerPoint, a couple of slides that deal with making good photographs in a second as well. But let's go back to the homework. Homework 3, it's called shapes. You are going to create 2 images that show simple geometric shapes. Simple means square, circle, triangle. Those mathematical style shapes that can be, made with straight lines. Circles aren't made with straight lines, but shapes that are mathematical in nature. You know what I'm saying? You're going to create 2 images of that in any way you want, digital, whatever camera you're using. You're going to also create 2 images that show simple organic shapes. What's the difference between a geometric and organic shape? Does anybody know?
Organic is like a nature, I guess.
Yes, shapes found in nature.
It's
Shapes
not drawn
man-made.
or built or whatever.
Yes,
So like not perfect shapes, just
not perfect or not man-made, basically. They're not even on each side, or perfectly straight, things like that. So basically it's found, or shapes found in nature is the easiest way to say it. So organic shapes. You're going to create, this is already on Blackboard as well. So you're going to create 2 images that illustrate formal lines. Formal lines. Formal lines could be anything like oops. Like, you can't see this grid paper, it's lined grid paper. And so the lines are all evenly spaced, perfectly spaced, and perfect thickness and all that. So nothing that can be perfect formal. The lines in this go across formally. They're all evenly spaced in the same direction. And there's a pattern kind of developing. So that would be more of a formal line. You're going to find these things and take pictures of them. Next thing is going to find 2 images that illustrate random lines, or lines that just randomly are there. Oh, and though your other lines, your formal lines, they can be curved as well, as long as there's some sort of formality about them. So the random lines is the same thing, but they have to be totally random. Like, do you remember pixie sticks when you were a kid? Okay.
Yeah.
If you dropped a whole bunch of pixie sticks on the ground, however they landed, that's random. You didn't place them there in any specific way. They just landed however they landed. Okay. And so that's another way of thinking about random. Let's see, next thing, draw a diagram of a camera obscura and how it operates. Haha, there's the drawing part. You're gonna do all of these. It says do Monday, but your class isn't on Monday. Your class is on Tuesday. So change that date to Tuesday before class, because we'll show them in class. And you're gonna create an album. We walked through how to do that, right? On Google Drive. Okay, and everybody's in the Google Drive. We've already decided that, right? Everybody's there. All right, so you're gonna create an album with those things in it, with those 8 images in it. And then you're gonna take a picture of the drawing that you make of a camera obscura. Hand drawing. I don't want it done on the computer.
Hand drawing. I suck at drawing. I'll have my 11-year-old do it. She's better than me.
All right. And so and then you're going to submit all that to the folder that says homework 3 shapes. I think I already made the folder. I'm not sure if I did or not, but I'll check in a second. And you'll just put the album link there and we'll go to it and we'll look at it next week. Any questions on homework? Pretty simple? It is pretty simple. Not a whole lot of homework yet. But this is what I want you to shoot. But I want you to pay attention to composition. Pay attention to the things that I'm getting ready to show you as well. That we're going to talk about good photographs. So that's the homework. Think about that. Like I was outside a while ago and I was looking. I wish I could just pick this up and show you. But I was looking at the shadows from a tree, a large tree that was on the snow, right? And so it created lines, organic kind of lines on the, or you know, on the snow, the shadows. So you can be almost anything. It doesn't have to be specific line. You can be anything that makes up those lines. All right, so that's the homework. I will quit sharing that. Stop share. And I'm gonna share. Where is the thing on good photos? Good photos. There it is. Good pictures, not good photos. All righty. So we were talking about good photos. If I'm going, am I going too fast? Am I talking too fast or anything? Okay.
No.
All right. So I was talking about good photos or good pictures. So these are some of the elements that go into good pictures that we're talking about. All right. Somebody had said exposure. Yes, exposure is important. I'm going to view this like a page. There we go. And fill this page. Okay, that's just the slideshow. Yeah, that's better. All right. So when it comes to making pictures, the exposure is important because it determines how a picture looks. And exposure is the lightness or darkness of an image. Just like my face is not exposed pretty well because it's so dark. Kelly's, the light is not on her face there because it's kind of dark in that space. So the exposure is not great. So I'm trying to let y'all visualize what I'm talking about. So the key things that determine exposure in an image, and if we were on a film camera, I'd have you show me on those particular cameras, but on your cameras, some of your digital cameras, you should put them on manual exposure, and we're gonna learn how to control manual settings so that we can learn how to control the exposure. And ways to control that exposure are through the ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture. The ISO is the film speed, all right? And if you're shooting digital, it's basically the sensitivity of the digital sensor to light. If you're dealing with film, it's the sensitivity of the paper, the negative in the paper, the sensitivity of the negative, the film, to light, okay? So the digital sensor takes the place of the film, but the ISO still controls the sensitivity of each of those things to the light. And so the shutter speed basically controls how long the shutter or the opening of the lens is open. All right, so the shutter speed is more like a garage door that opens and closes. You know, how long is the garage door open? Is it open for a long time or a short time? You know, that kind of thing. So it deals with time. Then there's the aperture, which deals with the lens as well, but it deals with how big the opening of the lens is. If the opening is really large, a lot of light comes in. If the opening of the lens is really small, a little less light comes in. So that's the aperture. And so each one of those things control light in its own way. The amount of light from the aperture is how much the amount volume of light that comes out. The shutter speed is how long, the longer it's open, the more light can come in or out, and then it's shut. And then the ISO is how sensitive the film is. And that's sort of like how sensitive your skin is when you're suntanning. If you're out suntanning and it doesn't take long for you to tan or to get some color, that means you're sensitive to the light. Okay. And then so if it takes a long time for you to tan or get darker, yeah, that means you're less sensitive to the light. And that's all kind of like the same kind of relationships. We're going to deal with exposure both in the camera and and on the computer. We can deal with that with editing, making something lighter or darker. But you want to always try to get your exposure right in the camera first. I hate having to do edit an image later. If I get it done the first time, it's quicker. I don't have to go back and make any changes or anything to anything. So ways to talk about exposure. You can talk about it as being underexposed, overexposed, or correctly exposed. And exposure depends on the light you have available and how well you set your exposure initially, and and if we were doing film, it's how well you develop the negative. All right. Here's a good example. If we're in the dark room, the image on the left is an underexposed negative. It's a dark image. You can't really see the details in it. That means it's underexposed, not enough light. Okay, so lots of dark values, and the shadows are really dark shadows, but no tonal variation. By tonal variation or any gradation of the different shades of gray is what I mean. So underexposed in negative or image. Underexposed image could be that the opening for the camera wasn't large enough, so not enough light came out. All right, or it could be the fact that the shutter was open too short of a period of time instead of a longer period of time to let more light go through the lens. Then there's the overexposed, too much light. That's something that's going to happen if you go out taking pictures of snow, because of the white and the reflection of the snow is going to create more light, and it causes. How many people have taken pictures of the snow already? Nobody? Oh.
Not me. It's too cold outside.
You can do it from inside.
Agreed.
You can point your camera out a window or out your door.
Yeah, but then sometimes the picture doesn't really come through.
But then it focuses on my dirty window and not the outside.
Yeah, exactly.
And so there you go, because you're using autofocus. Then that's when you manually focus and then focus on what you want to focus on. I want y'all to get away from using the automatic features of your camera and control your camera. Don't let the camera control you. You control the camera. All right. So you take it off those automatic features, put it on manual, and so you point. Like if you're on an iPhone, you would point at the item that you want to be in focus. So the yellow square goes around that particular item and it'll focus directly on that. So if I'm taking a picture of outside of the snow, there's a tree in the background, the camera's going to be trying to focus in on something, the snow, or if it can't find it or whatever, but it may not be able to find it. So I'm going to put my finger onto the tree or something else that's in the image so it'll focus in on that. And so you need to control that. Or that's your goal, is to learn to control the camera. So an overexposed negative image has too many highlights, too bright, very little tonal variation. And then a correctly exposed image has a great balance of things that are supposed to be white are white, the things that are supposed to be black are black. And you've got all those different variations of gray to deal with. And so that's the goal of your images, is to get a correctly exposed image. Composition is the other thing we have to think about. Like somebody had mentioned, what's in the image and how it's placed in the frame. And so how a picture is structured determines the composition of its elements. And you want to think about the foreground, the middle ground, and the background, and how they work together. What's important? What are they trying? What message are they trying to convey? Sometimes though, you have a picture that's flat. There's no depth really in it. It's all one level. And so what you choose to point your camera at will help you determine on how to structure those elements. So depending on what you take a picture of, depends on how you want, if you want to show a foreground, middle ground, and a background. So if a flat image is there's no dimension in the picture. A layered image is there are many different elements to show many different frames or levels for the image to latch onto. Then there's a clean composition where you're making sure that the focal point or subject of the picture stands out and there's little or no distraction in the background in the picture. And then there's a tight type of composition where it's similar to the clean one, but you're close up on something that you really is important, but everything else, you're like almost cropped out everything else that's unimportant in the image. And then the composition's also, its composition is determined by how close you are to the subject of the photograph. And it depends on the lens and the aperture that you use as well. So in this image, has anybody ever seen this image before by Lee Friedlander? All right,
No.
great image. Would you consider this have a lot of, does this image have a foreground, middle ground, and a background?
Not really.
No, it doesn't. It's considered flat. And so it's a street scene by Lee Friedlander. And it's and it shows how the person and an image of a person can interact. You know? So we've got a picture of a striptease act and then a lady standing in a window, but they're both kind of flat. You don't see any kind of dimension on either of them because you don't see any shadow or anything like that. And so the scene itself is flat without a lot of depth to it. This flatness helps convey the point of the image. This, you know, they both could be posters, even though we know that the one on the right is not a poster. They're both flat. This next image conveys kind of layers. How many different layers do you see in this image?
Several.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of images. You see two people going through two doors.
There's like the outside and the inside, and then the area that he's standing in is in between the inside and the outside.
And what about the reflection in front?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, so it's a lot of layers going on in one image. So we recognize the depth in this image because of that. And so that's what's kind of interesting about this image. All right, here's an image, another one by Lee Friedlander. It's just a wall with a patch of light on it. And that's Lee Friedlander, the artist himself, the photographer. And he put his face in the light, and just so that it'll be a little bit better exposed than being in the shadow. And that's a clean kind of composition because there's nothing really going on in the background. That's why whenever you go to a photographic studio, you remember your backgrounds in elementary schools, those school portraits. Remember they were always like a solid color for the most part. It's so that you can focus mainly on the subject. And so that would be a clean background and a clean composition. This, now that we've gotten those others, this, of course, is a tight composition. What do you think the subject is in this image?
The reflection on her.
The what?
The reflection on that's reflected on the lady.
What reflection?
The shadow of the other person.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. All right. So yeah, it's more the shadow, this Lee's shadow, than the reflection, than the person that's in it. But it's kind of neat because of all of that's his wife actually. But what's kind of neat is the fact that the person, his shadow, is centered in the frame, and it's in the main part of where the subject would be. But you're kind of confused because you have the body of the clear of the person, or his wife, standing there. But you can tell she's not as important because he cut her off at her eyes. It's a kind of a strange crop, but it actually works for that particular image. If it was an image of her, we'd kind of be upset that he cut her eyes out. Right. So by doing that, it helps us see that shadow as well. So good. So so we talked about different ways. So there's also the types of images and the reason why we do these images. That's content. So, in our highly visual culture that we live in, photographs are everywhere. We talked about that on the first day. And it's easy to say that anything can be photographed, of course, but the role a particular photograph plays depends on the context in which it's used. And we had mentioned what is the intent of the artist, right? And so in this class, there'll be times when I'll be giving you guidelines of how to photograph, but in general, the content is totally up to you. So there's types of photography. There's documentation. What kind of photography do you think would be considered documentation or documentary photography?
Something to do with like current events.
Current events, news, right? Journalism, the photojournalism, the stuff, the images that you see in the newspaper. Those are documents of evidence of what exactly happened. And most documentation or photojournalistic type of photography is taken to represent the truth or the way things are, right? There's no imagination pretty much put in it. It's always facts and factual, supposedly factual, but that's the history of documentary or newspaper or photojournalistic type photography. Then there's emotional photography, picture that's making you feel something. There's emotive photography, it's a more abstract way of making you feel something. The image doesn't necessarily represent something specific, but it makes you feel a certain way. Then there's a narrative type of photography. The photograph is trying to tell a story by the contents, different things going on in the image, and it helps you imagine a story or a narrative that goes along with it. Then, of course, there's a portrait, and then there's the landscape. So the portrait is a picture of a person. These are traditional definitions. They can be varied, but these are traditional definitions. Portrait, picture of a person, whether or not they're paying attention to you or not. Then landscape, a picture of a place or environment, but mostly a place. Then there's the conceptual photograph, or the interior photograph, like the inside of a building, like images you might see in the Architectural Digest magazine, or when you're watching Cribs on TV, on MTV. Does that still come on? MTV Cribs?
I hope it
I
does.
think that show was discontinued a while ago.
It was, but it comes on in reruns.
Well, maybe it's still on every once in a while, but I don't think a lot of us really watch TV anymore. It's all Netflix and
Correct.
Hulu,
And then,
stuff like that.
But then you can find some of those images on Netflix. You can find those online, interior images.
Oh, for sure.
For sure. So I showed my age. Terrible. Let's see. Let's see.
If you really want to show our age, talk about the show on MTV called Pimp My Ride.
Right, I do remember.
I used to watch all those shows when I was a kid.
That was the best. Anyway.
It really was.
So
I liked In Living Color.
Oh, and Living Color, that was, variety show. That was good. That was fun. So anyway, then there's the conceptual images, or pictures that convey an idea. And we already talked about that. We did a conceptual image with that beauty shot. Remember? It was image that conveyed an idea as opposed to a particular object. And so those are the different types of kind of photographs that I want you to start thinking about as you're shooting. One rule, and I let it go last semester, but I shouldn't have. And this is the rule that I had: no shooting, all your things that you shoot for this class, no pets and no children. All right, and by children, I mean kids under 5, 3, that you can't tell what, you can't say, here, stand in this position and stay in that position, and they will listen to you. Because you can't do that to a cat or a dog. Sometimes dogs you can, but no. I just make it easier with no pets. I've had people to say, well, I have cows. I said, are your cows, do you use them for food? Or do you use them, or is it your pet that you have, And they're like, well, no, they're farm animals, so that's not a pet. Okay? So no pets and no children.
No pictures of my own child.
No pictures of what?
My own child.
If your child is not a kid,
She's 11.
that's fine. You can
Oh.
control. You can control a little 11-year-old.
Yeah.
But babies and toddlers, no, you can't.
So 3 and under is no.
I'm sorry, what?
So basically 3 and under, no.
Right. So the main thing is control. The main thing is control. So think about what interests you and what you find interesting in the world. And I want you to really, I know we're not getting out and being social, but there's a lot of nice images out there today on the day like this. The sun is out, shadows are out. It's cold, but you can still take photographs. I was out in the snow shooting yesterday, and I'm going out to shoot in a little bit as soon as this class is over. So I shoot every day no matter what the weather is. I may just step foot out of my patio or on my front porch, but I shoot something every day. So here, we've got documentary photography. Here's an image just stating a fact. It's a sign that's in a window that Lee Freelander did in Dallas, documenting what something looks like. That's basically it. Then we've got an emotional photograph. Photograph of Vince Lombardi being carried off the field by Green Bay after winning the NFL championship in 1961. That shows a lot of emotion. Images can be a combination of documenting an event, like a sporting event, but it shows emotion as well. Here, this is an image, could be considered an interior image as well, but the addition of her smoking gives it a whole new sense, doesn't it? It's not just a plain architectural image, because it's got that smoke, and it has a sense of place and time and oldness. And I like that she's foggy right around her face as well. Her face isn't perfectly clear. Here's one that kind of, when you look at this image, what are some of the things that you see and make you wonder in this image?
Oh, like what the elderly man is thinking about. He kind of looks like he's lost in thought.
Right, correct, but it is a woman. But yes,
Oh,
it is.
I feel bad now.
No. It's but you're right. You're like they're lost in thought. What else is interesting about this image?
The windmill in the back.
Yeah, you're like, where is it? What's going on? That room is really dark. She's got a table. It's covered in white, and she's just sitting there and she's looking out another window. It's kind of interesting. So it makes you wonder. So you're telling a story in your mind, like what's going on.
She looks.
You're trying to decipher it, and that's more of a narrative photograph.
She looks sad / shocked, like she just lost her husband or something.
And she did, because it's a widow. That's what it says.
Oh, look at that. I didn't read that.
Yeah,
Okay.
It is a story showing a person, and she is actually a widow in her parents' apartment. But see, that's good. It told a story, and you came up with something in your mind. Here's a traditional type portrait. You know, they don't necessarily have to be looking at the camera, but it's still a portrait. Simple background, but it's blurred out a little bit, you know, to emphasize the person in it. Landscape. There's that shadow, like I was talking about, that they're down on the snow. That's the type of photograph that I'm getting ready to go take in a
Does
second.
that guy really like shadows?
He does like shadows. Hint, hint. Yes.
Is this the same guy that did the shadow of himself on his wife?
Yes, correct. Lee Freelander. Yes, it is. And so, but it's an image of outside. It's an image of the land. It's an image of a place. Here, in an interior image. What's interesting about this image?
The toilet.
The toilet, yeah.
Why? Like why? I don't understand why the toilet's in the picture.
This image was taken in a motel in the 1960s, but it's got all the elements of a motel room. The TV, the window, the chair, the toilet, all of that's in a hotel room. It tells all, you know, that's a complete picture of a hotel room, basically, you know. The only thing that's not shown is the bed. You know? So, but it's many, you know, it's an interior shot that shows that interior space, and that interior space has a couple of other things in it. You know, it describes the space. Here's one that's more conceptual. What do you think the idea behind this one is? And so physically we see what? Barbed wire, we see a pier, we see the texture of the wood, we see an empty sky, we see water. But does this image necessarily have anything to do with a sky or a pier or barbed wire?
Mm,
What do y'all think when you see this image?
I notice more of the pier in the ocean.
You notice it, but it doesn't look like it's a major part. You know, it doesn't
Yeah.
look like it's about the pier, does it?
No, it seems like it's more focused about the barbed wire and like the symbol that it's making.
Yeah, you don't know, but it's like it gives you kind of an uneasiness, and you really makes you think. And so it's that more conceptual.
And like the details of the wood that it's sitting on,
Mhm.
they're just, it's the details of the wood is just really clear.
But it, you know, it's kind of it's very moody. It has a sense of openness and emptiness, but then unease because of that barbed wire in a way. You know, the tension in that barbed wire. So, come on. So your goal is, and for this class, is to combine technical and the visual aspect. Combine the perfect exposure, the composition. Combine all these things to make good photographs, and to have a well exposed image, controlling the light, and to make a very interesting image. Don't just give me a boring image. You know, that's the key thing. Make images that are exciting, that make people want to see them, that make people want to talk, that make people want to feel one way or another, good or bad. So it is possible to have an image that is dynamically visual, but not correctly exposed, you know? And so you've got to balance that whole thing. It's got to be technically correct and conceptually good. How to use each of those things in balance. So exposure is important. Pay attention to all the elements of the frame. Ask yourself if it would be more interesting. Would it be a more interesting picture if I moved closer or moved further back? You know, don't always put your picture just right in the middle. And then it's like middle size. Either fill up the frame or make it really small to convey a certain message. Ask yourself if you have made this picture before. Don't always make the same pictures. Take a visual risk. What is, you know, do something that you wouldn't normally do to take the picture. Be intentional with your composition. Compose your image on purpose. Don't just make it haphazardly. And then use light to your advantage. You know, and move around till the light hits the subject right. You know, where it's more interesting or doesn't make people, like if you're taking a picture of somebody and the sun is in front of them this way and they're squinting, that doesn't make a good image. So have them turn where they're not turning directly into the light, where they don't have to squint as much. You know, those kind of things. All right, so those that's what we're gonna look at. That's all we were gonna look at when we talked about the homework and continuing to take pictures. Now we're gonna start thinking about the history of photography, the boring stuff. All right. So was any of those pictures interesting to you? Did you like any of those? And I know I focused in on Lee Friedlander for the most part and Sylvia Plath, but for the most part, you know, did you like him? He was, and so
Yes, for
he's,
sure.
you know, he was around when he did take color photos later on, but when he came up, there was mostly black and white photographs is what he took. Okay. So let's see. History. So get time to take notes. Darn it. Let's see. I'm gonna make that disappear. I'm not gonna talk the whole time. I'll talk a little bit, talk about that thing, and then I'll show little short snippet videos about some of the people that I'm talking about as well to help some of the information sink in. This is not a thorough history of American photography, but it is a pretty complete history of kind of the important players. Where is my? There it is. All right. Oops. All right. So we already know what this is. Thinking about this is one of the kind of the images that you might have to draw. Haha. Camera obscura. What's going on in a camera obscura? Don't forget to show the subject, what you're photographing, how it responds. You don't have to have a, like this one has a mirror in the back where it reflects it up. It can go straight to the back of the screen in whichever one you create, however you're thinking about it. Earlier we had talked about Thomas Wedgwood. You can't see my screen, can you?
Yeah.
Can you see
Yes.
it?
Yeah, we
Okay.
can.
All right. Yesterday, I started this PowerPoint presentation and I was on slide 3 before everybody said, we don't see the slides you're talking about. So anyway, so Thomas Wedgwood was one of those aristocrats who was experimenting with photography. I don't think he's on your test, but he was one of those people in Great Britain who were experimenting during that same time. What's the name of this photograph?
View from the workroom at Le
View
Gras.
from Le Gras.
View from Le Gras. All you have to say is view from Le Gras if you see it. That's the main part of it. So yes, good. And you will see that again. So that's one reason it keeps coming up. All right. So then there was a guy named William Henry Fox Talbot. He was the guy that I talked about, or that the history talked about, was in Great Britain, who was photographing, and he tried to make money off of photography and sell the process. And his process was called the Talbot type, or also the calotype, C-A-L-O-T-Y-P-E. He was trying to patent it as the Talbot type so he can make money, but most everybody else in the world, a lot of people still called it the calotype, just more of a generic name. And he does not look like a happy guy, does he?
No.
Look at
Not
that hair.
at all.
What?
He does not look happy at all. Like
Not
he
at
does
all.
not know how to smile.
Here's an image of one of his calotypes. This is one of his most famous ones, the open door. If
It
you're
makes
ever in
me
Great
think
Britain,
of a witch
what?
or Harry Potter.
It does. And it's in that same part of Great Britain, probably. You know, it's in that same kind of era or whatever. It's a castle. Or you used to see the images of the place. You can, if you Google Talbot and the open door, you can see what it looks like today and see the whole how it was. And it, you know, it's a big English estate, basically. You know, everybody back then was really rich and wealthy. The people who practiced photography, you know, it was a very elitist hobby. So this guy, why was he important? Does anybody remember?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Does anybody remember why this guy was important?
The daguerreotype.
The daguerreotype. And he was the guy, he and Niepce were kind of partners or colleagues who had developed the process. And he did the daguerreotype, correct. And back then the calotype was on paper. The daguerreotype and the heliograph were on metal. I'm gonna escape here and I'm gonna go to here. And I also put a link on Blackboard already, but I have, there it is. All right, so here is the daguerre. This is a little video that talks about the daguerreotype process. I put the whole link to the whole series that talks about each photographic process that we'll talk about in class. And this one we're gonna start off with the daguerreotype.
I think it's impossible for us today to imagine what a revelation the first photographs would have been to people. These mirrors with a memory to record things that looked just like what we saw. People's ideas of time changed completely. For the first time, you would know what your grandparents looked like, even if they died before you were born. To see this process make its place in the lives of ordinary people is, to me, the most exciting thing about it. It changed everything.
In 1814, 1815, you have a man named Nicéphore Niepce. And what he discovered was that asphalt was sensitive to light. He painted the solution on a piece of glass and put an engraving on a piece of paper on top of that. And where the light shined through and exposed that asphalt, it hardened. If you put that piece of glass with the asphalt into a solvent, it will remove the areas that weren't hardened. The earliest photograph we know is on a piece
That's
of
the view from the
pewter
Gras right there.
made by Nicéphore Niepce. It's a view from a window. It's from the 1820s. And this image made by asphalt still exists. So that's the invention of photography. Niepce knows that he's onto something, and he takes Louis Daguerre on as a partner.
Daguerre was well known in Paris in the 1820s, well before the 1839 announcement of the daguerreotype. He was a showman. He ran this 75-foot diorama.
Daguerre himself wants to make images. He understands how a camera obscura works. Niepce didn't have the money. He didn't have the youth. He didn't have the health. He really kickstarted Daguerre. When Niepce died, Daguerre continued his experiments on his own. By 1839, Daguerre has a system that is fully realized. It's perfect. It's a piece of copper coated with silver, and you have to polish it very well to the point where you have a polish that when you turn the plate towards a darkened room, it looks black. It's fumed with iodine, and when you take it out of the box, it's yellow. That's silver iodide. Plate is then put into a camera obscura, or we would say camera now, but a camera obscura. Given enough time, it's exposed. When you take it out of the camera in a darkened room, there's nothing to see on the plate. Completely invisible, same yellow coating. But when you put it in another box with a little container of mercury and heat the mercury, the fumes of the mercury dance upon the plate. And when you withdraw that from the box, you have an image. You still have to fix the image. And fixing is a strange term. It basically means that you're preventing the plate from changing any more as light strikes the plate. You place it into a solution that fixes it. It's something that we now all call hypo. The daguerreotype is placed into a special case. It's designed to keep air away from the plate because air is what makes silver tarnish. Daguerre would give the process to the government. The government then would allow anyone in the world to do the daguerreotype, except England.
Except
And
England.
So if you wanted to make daguerreotypes in England, you had to pay a fee.
That's Talbot.
This is the Giroux daguerreotype camera. It would be the world's first commercially manufactured lens solar cameras. It's the camera, but it's also the system that goes with it that you need to process, sensitize and process the image.
It's essentially an American phenomenon. It was the Americans that embraced it, that used it. It was Americans that were leaving home and striking out further and further west so that people could have something to think about and to reflect on and to remember people by.
We're in the photography vault at George Eastman House. This is where all of our photo collections are stored. And here we have our wall of daguerreotypes. We have one of the largest collections of daguerreotypes in the world, over 3,500 daguerreotypes, including 1,500 French daguerreotypes, which is the largest collection of French daguerreotypes outside of France. The daguerreotype is both a negative and a positive image at the same time.
I think really to see a daguerreotype and get the full effect, you have to be holding it. It's an intimate thing, it's reflective, and sometimes you do see yourself. And it's kind of makes you part of the object. With daguerreotypes, there's infinite detail.
There's something just so compelling about daguerreotypes. They're not made with the negative. So that daguerreotype plate was actually in the room with the person being photographed. So there's something of, I read as that person's energy on the plate.
It's a very, very primitive process, much more so than all the processes that we cover. I can take you to an antique shop that's 15 minutes from here, and we can find a daguerreotype made in the 1850s. And guess what? They're still in perfect condition.
We don't think about that. I think that's kind of cool. The fact that they're still around.
Now
You
I
know,
want to
by
go to a bunch of antique shops until I find one.
yeah, you're gonna be looking for it.
I kind of want to do it on my own.
You can. It's expensive.
Seems so.
But you can do it on your own. There's another process called the tintype that that is a little bit more economical, and that you can get the supplies to do really easily. And was it year before last, or was it 3 years ago? Must have been 3 years ago. We had a tintype artist come and make tintypes and taught students how to do it, how to make those type of old-fashioned prints. Are you seeing the video screen now? The broom?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so that was Daguerre. Then we have a picture of John Herschel, the same guy who invented the cyanotype process. Okay, and so that blueprint process, I did order your things, and so hopefully that stuff will be here within 2 weeks, and y'all be able to come up to the school and get your kit, which will have some materials to make cyanotypes in. So I'm excited about that as well. This is an image of Julia Margaret Cameron. Julia Margaret Cameron was probably considered the world's first female photographer. She photographed images of society, women and men during that Edwardian period and 1800s, late 1800s and things, Edwardian period. And she photographed them. When you look at this image, how would you describe this image, especially compared to this image? How would you compare the look of this image, other than the color?
Not as grainy.
Not as what?
Grainy.
It's not as grainy. It's very soft.
Yeah.
Yeah, very soft focus. It's sort of like she used a filter, like we would use a filter on Facebook or something, right? Or on Twitter or whatever. What is it? What do we use filters on? Snapchat or something like that, right? And it's because she did. Her images weren't as focused. They were all soft, focused like this. And so a lot of people at the time, a lot of the male photographers didn't really consider her a professional photographer because her images weren't crisp and sharp and clean. But that was her aesthetic style. And most of her images, if you look her up, her images looked like that. And they were all soft. They were consistent. So they were done that way on purpose. It wasn't, you know, an accident thing or she didn't learn it. She could have done that, but that was her kind of signature look on her images. And if you look her up, Julia Margaret Cameron, you'll see all of her images have that same kind of ethereal kind of quality to them. Here's an image of Desdery. Desdery is a French socialite and not socialite, businessman. That's the best way to put it. A French businessman. And he was famous for creating, creating what we would call a carte de visite. What do you think what a carte de visite stands for? Kind of sound it out. Think about it. Or does anybody know French?
I mean, I took like 2 years of French, but did I learn much? That's
Okay. Sound it out. What's the first word? Carte. What do you think that stands for?
Maybe like a cartridge.
Cartridge? Almost, maybe.
Like the way the picture, I don't know if it's just sitting on something or not, but it looks like a version of like a Polaroid.
Okay. Polaroid. That's came way after. So this was before that.
Yeah,
So
no, I know. I was just saying,
one
like,
thing
it
about
just the way it's sitting, it looks like
it's
a
an
different.
object. So it's
Yeah.
an actual object, right? It's a piece of paper, a card. So think of cart as card,
It's like
C-A-R-D.
it's like a greeting card.
Right, but instead of greeting, it's a visiting card, carte de
Yes,
visite.
it means visit card.
Correct, visit card. And so when people would visit somebody, like we have business cards today, we'd leave a business card with somebody, they would
Yeah.
leave picture, and they would leave carte de visites with people to show who had come by and visited them or who they had met with.
It's
This was
funny
one of
'cause
the things that they would leave.
when I saw visit card, the first thing I thought of was like passport.
Oh yeah, yeah, travel.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is more of a visiting card, and it's the person was Louis Thiers in the image, but this is an example of what a visiting card or carte de visite look like. You can find these occasionally around town still around as well. Here's the camera that that Desdery invented to create these. And it became a big thing in France. Everybody wanted to have their pictures taken at his salon, and big fancy thing, and everybody who was anybody would get their pictures taken and have these carte de visites made. This camera would take four pictures on one single, it had four lenses, and it would take four pictures on one single sheet of paper. Well, actually it would take 8, because notice how the back of this camera is wider. See how wide it is in the back? And the lens is really small here. So it'd be a larger sheet of paper, and this lens would shift to one side, take 4 images, then shift to the other, take 4 more images, and all 8 images would be on one sheet of paper, like this. And so they were calling cards, and he invented the carte de visite, or visiting card, and it enabled the mass production of photographs. And on the 27th of November in 1854, he patented the system of printing 10 photographs on a single sheet. Although there's no evidence that a system printing more than 8 actually materialized. He patented a 10 machine process, but nobody has evidence, can find a camera that did 10. This was the first patent ever for a carte de visite. And they were the size of a normal conventional visiting card at the time. So it's kind of interesting how you could do that, and how he kind of mechanized making multiple images without having to sit to do each individual one. Next, there was the tintype. The tintype really caught on in America. They used thin metal sheets of iron, and they would take those metals and sort of, you remember how in the slideshow earlier, they showed how he would coat the top of the metal with a liquid, let it dry, put it in the camera, take the picture, then come back and go with the mercury vapors to make the image materialize. But instead of being so precious as a daguerreotype, which was more expensive, and it was done on copper, this was done on a cheaper material of iron. And so it made it more affordable. So it really took off in America because it was cheaper. And so everybody would have their tintype or portrait made. And they were small, and people would keep them in their wallets. During the Civil War, that was one of the things people would find in dead soldiers' wallets were tintypes of their loved ones. And they would take them and send them back to their families. So some of those tintypes are still around. You can find them all over the place. I have some at school, and I don't have any at home. I thought I did. Well, actually, I have some at my mom's house, some old family ones that I found recently. But you find them in antique stores and things still around. That's why, you remember the first day of class I told you, print the most important images to you, or that are important to you? That's the same way. These last. But all the things that are in your camera and your phone, if they're going to disappear. These physical metal objects last. So that's kind of really important to think about. So we've gone through the early 1800s. We've gone through right before, this was 1854. Here's 1870. Tintypes became really, really, really popular. right before and during the Civil War, there was a guy named Matthew Brady. Has anybody heard of him before?
No.
No? All right, Matthew Brady was a famous photographer. He had studios in New York, DC, and he photographed, or not, it wasn't DC at the time, but he photographed, well, in, what do you call it, Virginia. And he had studios around the country, and he would photograph the soldiers and the generals and the important people of the time. I mean, Abraham Lincoln, those kind of people. He would photograph these people, and famous for that. He's also famous for Civil War photography. He was the first person to photograph war. He was the first person to photograph war and to take war home to the average everyday person living in the city who wasn't near a battlefield. He showed the dead bodies. He showed the effects of war. I'm going to show you a little thing on him, but then after I show you that, I'm going to tell you a little secret about him. I didn't want to do that. Did I lose my page? Uh-oh. Oh, there it is. Okay, there it is. Let's see. Okay. Matthew Brady. Everybody can see my screen, yes. Okay. Matthew Brady's synonymous with Civil War photography, so this is what he was famous for doing. Most of his, I'm going to turn the volume down and talk through it. He was a preeminent photographer of the period. He regarded his obligation to preserve the faces of historic men and mothers. And that's another picture of him. And
in 1844, and by the 1860s is one of the foremost portrait photographers in the United States.
I talked my way through this video earlier. I had the sound all the way out last time.
The public is assembling photographic albums and filling the pages not only with pictures of family and friends, but they're also filling their albums with images of the leaders of the day. And Brady is one of the primary sources for such photographs.
It's interesting because it shows him very well turned out. It's a very impressive figure of a man. In other words, it's a very impressive figure of a man president who you should vote for. And afterwards, he said that Mr. Brady and the Cooper Union made me president.
Showing the dead bodies.
He was driven. He knew that it might not be the most business wise thing to do, but he knew that he had to document the Civil War.
Did hire people to do a lot of the shooting. but it was his studio.
When Brady came back from the Battle of Antietam, he showed the pictures of all of the dead. And people would gather around and look at them in awe. It was the first time that Americans had seen their own dead, and you half expected that someone would cry out that they recognized an uncle, a father, a brother, a son. It was just horrific. It was the first time that people had seen the real horrors and how bloody the battles were. He was one of the first to really understand photography as an art. Brady had a vision for photography that was bigger than anybody else had had previously. And he was out front. He was out front in terms of having multiple studios. He was out front in getting sitters to come sit for him. He was out front in thinking about documenting the Civil War and all the players, cultural players and political players. And so there's just so much material. Nobody can outdo him for that era.
All right, so, oops. So, Matthew Brady, and thinking about his photographs and his photography, let's see, where'd it go? Oh yeah, y'all can see that, okay. Thinking about him and his photograph, this photograph. So he made a living, didn't make a good living, but he did document everything. What has been found out recently about his photographs is that, how many people did we have in the class that have ever hunted before? And ever shot a gun? Anybody?
I've shot a gun.
All right. And so noticing when we looked at some of those pictures when they were showing the dead, notice most everybody's on their back, right? You don't really see a lot of people on the stomachs and things like that, or just slumped over. One of the things that he and his people did, they moved bodies to make better pictures.
That's kind of creepy and gross.
Yes. Another thing that they did is, and they have proved it, they've proven this, is that a lot of the pictures, some of the pictures have the same body in them. They've moved one body from one battlefield to the other to get a good picture.
Ew.
Yeah.
And they've proven it because they've done facial recognition and done those things on these photographs and said that's the same person. And how could they be at this battle and then at this other battle? Several battles, not just one. And so there's still facts and they're artifacts of war, but they were manipulated, right? And then normally at war, and especially during the Civil War, when the opposing team, the victorious team, the team that won, or the side that won would go, and they would go rifle through the bodies of the dead for money, for valuables, for if they had a better weapon, if they had a better coat or better shoes. So you would see a lot of these soldiers, dead soldiers, without shoes. And you'd see their pockets pulled inside out from people taking things out of their pockets and things, or no coats and things on. And so a lot of times Brady would go in and he would put the pockets back in, and he would do things to make the body look better. Or his team would do that to make the body look better, to make a better portrait or picture. So that's something that came out afterwards. It still doesn't take anything away from what he did, but that's just something that they found out, way after the fact. You think that's, so we've been lying with photography for many years. It's not all truthful. All right. Also, during the America's expansion toward the West, there was Timothy O'Sullivan. He followed during that great migration of people, not the Great Migration, but when people they were exploring the West, down the 49th parallel, going west, discovering new territory. They sent photographers with them. One of those photographers was Timothy O'Sullivan, and he's famous for documenting the mountains in the Grand Canyon and the southwestern United States during that time. Then there's a guy named Edward Muybridge. Has anybody heard of him before?
Nope.
Nope. All right. I bet you when you think about it, you'll be thankful that you had heard of him. Being thankful that we had heard of him because, let's see, escape there. Oops. All right. Edward Muybridge is famous for motion studies.
Edward Muybridge began his career as a landscape photographer in 1867 and was based in San Francisco. He began his attempts to record movement in 1872, helping former California Governor Leland Stanford to settle a bet that his horse Occidental lifted all four legs off the ground while running. In 1882, The Horse in Motion was published with Muybridge's photographs. Muybridge began working on a project that was to be a sort of atlas of human and animal movement at the University of Pennsylvania Veterinary Department in 1884. Over the next year, he would produce over 20,000 plates that he would distill into the 781 that are part of the 11-volume set, called Animal Locomotion, an electrophotographic investigation of consecutive animal movements. These studies, created by dozens of cameras surrounding the subjects, can be appreciated as a sort of rudimentary cinema. The subjects came from all walks of life: laborers, professors, art school models, university athletes, patients of Philadelphia neurologist Francis Durkham, and even Muybridge himself. Animals were photographed at the Philadelphia Zoological Gardens. After completing the photography and sending them to New York for printing, Muybridge, ever the self-promoter, traveled the world to sell subscriptions. A full set was placed at the Corcoran, the Library of Congress, and one was even sent to the Sultan of Turkey. The great cost of printing and manufacturing restricted its sale to few complete copies. The first motion pictures would be produced just a few years later, in the 1890s. Muybridge is widely credited for paving the way for cinematic inventions throughout his groundbreaking work in capturing continuous motion that beautifully combines art and science.
So, we're kind of thankful that he did that. We wouldn't have movies, or they might have started a little bit later, then because of his studies of setting up 10, 12 different cameras that would, as the horse galloped by, it would hit the string and take a picture. And so he would do that, set up all these multiple cameras to take these images. And I think that's kind of interesting. So he's famous for his motion studies in his images and creating, showing motion in images, not motion pictures, but motion in photographs, period. Let's see now. There's that. And so he was the one who proved that at one time all four hooves of a horse are off the ground. There's that first commercially successful camera, the Kodak Brownie. basically, you see, it's a camera obscura, a box, and it's film. 120 roll film was rolled inside of it, and you would send the whole camera back to the company to get it developed, and they'd send you back another camera with film loaded in it, 100 shots. Then there's this guy named Edward Sheriff Curtis. What a name, you know? All right, and yeah, he's got a. Is that a cowboy hat or what kind of hat? You know, is that a cowboy hat or not?
That is
Looks
not
like a woman's hat.
Yeah, it does. Looks like it has a bow on the side. And, yeah.
But okay, but yeah, think of the name, Sheriff Curtis, you know. And so
I mean,
I
I
was
guess like with a name like that, I don't know. You can wear whatever kind of hat you want.
right, I guess you could. So Edward Sheriff Curtis was famous for photographing the Indians. He would photograph the different tribes of Indians throughout the West. He would mainly in the North Pacific Northwest, but he would photograph go to different tribes and not infiltrate, but make friends with different tribes, live with them for a while, and photograph them. And he made these different volumes of books based on different tribes around the United States. And so a lot of people thought he might have exploited them because instead of photographing them in their day-to-day, everyday activities, he would make sure that they wore their headdresses or their ceremonial costumes or garb and photograph those and only publish those images. He wouldn't take their everyday life images. He was funded by Teddy Roosevelt, and he thought those were great. The subject matter was great, and so he funded all of his trips and making his volumes of books of those Indians. And you can look them up, and they're really expensive, but they're really popular. Actually, they were popular to a certain group of people, but they still didn't really make the money that they thought they would make doing it. Then there's Jacob Riis. Jacob Riis. Does anybody remember him? You might have studied him in high school. He's a social reformer, and a social reformer, he used photography to change society. He used his photography to document the living conditions and slum living conditions, poor living conditions in New York in the late 1800s, the slums and things. And because of him, when, the eighth floor tenements without electricity, things like that. Because of his photography and photographing these things, he would, change made. They made change. They put electricity in places. They came up with safety things, and no more than a certain amount of people could live in a certain apartment. So they had to have fire escapes, things like that. And it was because of that, because of his work of documenting those poor living conditions, that that we have safe living conditions, and tenements and slumlords and things were gotten rid of and made to follow certain rules and things like that. It was because of Jacob Riis. Another photographer that was a social change photographer was Lewis Hine. This is an image of one of the spinners at the Whitnall Cotton Mill in North Carolina, and the fact that she was like only 10 years old working in a cotton mill. Lewis Hine was significant in the fact that his images of child laborers has helped with change child labor laws this many years. And let's see, child labor laws, Lewis Hine. Okay, where's my document for Lewis Hine? Okay, yeah, there it is. All right. So, and so he is really instrumental in showing this.
once
He
the
led
pandemic hit,
change.
we had nobody coming into the showroom. So we started doing virtual
I hate
visits
this
via
commercial. I
Microsoft
hate this
Teams.
commercial, but
Hey,
I'm
is
sick
that
of seeing
TK?
it.
Hi, how are you?
All of a sudden, we could open up our showroom to customers around the world.
Here we go.
At the time that Lewis Hine began photographing for the National Child Labor Committee, most people did not believe that child labor existed or was a problem. And so his first effort was to literally assemble evidence. The cotton mill photographs are perhaps the best known of Hine's pictures. They're extremely moving, partly because the children are just so little. The machines are so big. The children working in coal mines were 7 and 8 years old, and they worked in the dark. The newsies were the newsboys and occasionally newsgirls who sold newspapers on the street at all hours of the day or night. The newsies, of course, were also exploited child laborers. It was Hine's photographs, as much as any written word, that persuaded legislators to change the law. This book is an effort to reconsider Lewis Hine, who is well known in the United States, but not so well known outside of this country. He is called the father of the documentary movement, although his work begins long before documentary is defined as a medium. He saw himself as someone who was contributing to social change.
Yeah.
He started with photographing immigrants. The Ellis Island photographs were his first serious photographic project. And what strikes me about them is the direct human connection between the photographer and his subjects. I mean, Lewis Hine was a formal little man. He always wore a suit and tie. I imagine him in the chaos of Ellis Island, picking out someone and probably without a common language, persuading them to stop, to stand still for a photograph. Hine's mission was to put a human face on what most people saw as a kind of broad brush immigrant problem. I think that labor is his core subject from the beginning. He starts by looking at labor that is bad for people, and that's child labor. But he moves into a discussion of labor as a wonderful thing.
I'm not gonna do the
Laborers
whole
are
video,
his heroes,
but,
and you need only look at the Empire State Building photographs to see
oh,
that.
I forgot. Those are important.
He's photographing
These
these
Empire
ordinary
State
people,
photographs.
you
You've
know,
seen that
riveters
Empire
and,
State photograph where
welders
people are on a
going about
people,
their
kids,
business in a
men
way
are
that
on
makes them heroic.
on
It
a
was a tremendously
they're on a beam and they're
aspirational
having
building.
lunch.
And
You've
so
seen that picture
to
over the years.
underscore
He took that
the
picture.
power and importance of this building and the men who built it was almost a defiant response to the Depression. I think he teaches us that photographs can be simultaneously to
There we go. So yeah, he took that picture, and I thought that was interesting because at first I didn't know he had taken that picture, and I was like, wow, that's a famous picture, and you know, you're like, okay, that is cool. Now let's see. There's one of these guys, you know, young kids working in a coal mine. It's because of his images that y'all didn't have to start working at 8 and 9 years old, you know, because of the changing child labor laws back then. Then we get to more modern things in the early 1900s. This is when art. This is one person when I'll talk about him a little bit more when we start talking about artists or photographers who used photography as an art form as opposed to as a document. Man Ray was one of the first people to use it for creative purposes as an art form as opposed to as a document. And he was an avant-garde artist, and this is one of his images. Something totally made, created, but created to create a feeling or mood or for art's sake, not necessarily for something to look pretty and just something to look at specifically, not to learn information from. So, we can see that there's a distinct difference between this and Louis Hines' work, distinctive purpose. And this is an Andre Cortez, a Frenchman, who actually also took art for art's sake. So here it's all about the leading line in this image and what's going on, more of a narrative or telling a story in his images as well. Frenchman. Then there's Bernice Abbott. She photographed New York City sort of the way Louis Hines did, but she thought about it as beautiful, but she thought about all the construction, all the buildings, and she photographed New York in a way that the average New Yorker on the ground didn't see New York. She would get up on the buildings, looking down and looking at all the structures and looking at the straight lines and all the buildings and photograph it that way. We'll look more at her when we do my presentation on female photographers. Then there's Henri Cartier-Bresson. Write this down. It's called the decisive moment. Write that term down. Decisive moment. And then as you write that down, write his name down, Henri Cartier-Bresson. And I want y'all to look up what that means, the decisive moment. Put that on your homework. And that's him in the picture.
Looks like he's drawing a self-portrait, but the portrait that he's drawing looks a lot older.
It's a mirror.
No, but the picture in his
yeah, of himself, yeah.
Looks a lot older than he does.
Yeah, maybe. Well, maybe, we see ourselves a little bit differently too, But it's weird because when I draw myself thinner and younger. Kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah. I mean, so basically, you're doing the opposite of what they say cameras do. They say cameras add 10 pounds, right?
Right. This is another one by Henri Cartier-Bresson about being at the right place at the right time. That's that decisive moment, and making that split-second decision to take the picture at that particular time. Here's an image by Dorothea Lange. There's a list of movies that I'll give you that I think there's a great movie on her life that you can find on Netflix. It's pretty free, or I think it's Netflix or maybe Amazon Prime, about her life, where she photographed for the Farm Security Administration, and she photographed people as they were doing the Great Migration to the West. And during this was taken in Oklahoma by Dorothea Lange. Can't think of the lady's name now. She's famous. Y'all have seen this picture before though, right? Migrant Mother. There's actually a series, about 10 of the images, where this whole series, she's breastfeeding her children. And this is just this is the most famous one because most people don't want to, censoring, they don't show a breast, on most, they don't show that. But if you go to the School of the Artists Institute of Chicago, you can see all of the images on display. Then there's Margaret Burke White. She was a model who turned to be a photographer, and she worked for Time Life magazine. And she photographed war. But she would go in after events that happened in the US or Germany, war or devastation, and she'd photograph those areas. Here she photographed the Louisville flood in Louisville, Kentucky in 1937. And it was all about the people and the effects of certain events. And so she would always be in the right after those events though. And great images. Then there's Robert Capa. He was the first real war photographer. We saw that Matthew Brady photographed the aftermath of war, but Robert Capa got on the boats with the soldiers, and he was right there with them with his camera photographing. Here's one of his most famous images of D-Day and from World War II. A few of you might have seen that one before. And he has a brother that was also a photographer who photographed war as well. And so he's really famous for that. Then there's James Clerk Maxwell, first color photograph. That's who made that. But we're not going to study too much about him, but that's what he's famous for. Then we come into more modern day. Richard Avedon, a famous fashion photographer, but he photographed everyday Americans as well. He photographed, he did a whole series, this series called The American West, which is a great series, a group of books, and an exhibition that was shown originally in Fort Worth at the Amon Carter Museum. And it was a book of average everyday people from West Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, state fairs, county fairs and things. And he'd put this big white background drop on the wall, and he'd have them stand there and he'd shoot them with his large format camera, just however they came, however they look. If you look his name up, Richard Avedon, you'll see there's one with this guy that was a beekeeper. So he's covered with bees. You know, if you Google just his name, Richard Avedon, American West, you'll see some really incredible images, and they're all black and white. And he's done famous people as well. So he's famous for that. This is another one of his from the American West. But he had a particular style. Then there's Gary Winogrand. Gary Winogrand he's in my history of photographers. It's weird because the guy that I learned, my graduate professor in photography, studied under a guy named Bart Parker at Rhode Island School of Design. And Bart Parker, who taught at Rhode Island School of Design, studied under Gary Winogrand. Then also, went to grad school with him. So then also, in my first photographer when I was in community college, David Newman, was, and later in Gary's later age, before he died, he was a professor at the University of Texas in Austin. And my professor at my community college was his graduate assistant at University of Texas. So I'm kind of related to him in the photo series of, family tree thing. And it's kind of cool. But anyway, he's a famous street photographer. When I say street photographer, does anybody know what I'm talking about?
Don't they just take pictures like on the street? Like they ask people if they want their picture taken? No, I don't know. I can't remember.
It is street photography, but back then you didn't really ask people.
Oh, you just took them.
Right, you just took them. It's not like today, you walking down the street and people look all like, why is he taking a picture? Why does he have a camera? You know how.
So basically it was like being at Walmart, people watching, but they're photographing it.
Correct. Kind of,
okay.
Yeah, basically. And so with that, there's a movie that a friend of mine, Sasha Fryer, made recently on his life. And it's a great movie. And it's called All Things, what's it called? All Things Photographable is the name of the movie. And
Gary Winogrand was one of the principal American photographers of his generation. He was a true poet of photography, a true poet of American life. He took this genre of so-called street photography and turned it on its head and made it something new.
This guy shot over 1 million photographs in his lifetime, which is absolutely phenomenal when you stop and think about that.
Winogrand was controversial in his time and even remains so.
One of the things that's always really fascinated me about him is that he died with thousands of rolls of undeveloped film. What could that be?
Famously, there's a lot of nothing. There's a lot of pictures of nothing. But I discovered things in that nothing that people didn't know and still don't know.
That movie is on. You can rent that.
No, the only thing is that
all the
I
things,
like
all the
not to exist.
Netflix
Don't
and
make
stuff
sense
now.
to you. In the end, all I can do is wrestle, and whatever comes out, that's the way I have to express it. I would like not to exist. I'm not speaking in mysteries, and I'm not talking about suicide or anything. I just assume that exists.
So it's a great little movie. If you want to hear about street photography, it's really interesting about him. It's one of my, it was, I remember getting so excited that my friend sent me a copy of it before it came out in the movie theaters. And then they showed it on PBS. And we were so excited that her movie got bought. And she did really good selling that movie. I was like, oh, I know somebody famous. She made a movie about a famous person, and she's a friend. So I thought that was kind of cool. That's Gary Winogrand. Let's see. All these dang windows I have open. It's terrible. This is Diane Arbus, another photographer. She ended her life ended too soon. By suicide as well. But she did photographs of this. She did photographs of people she called that lived on the fringe of society. She did a whole book on carnival acts and people that worked at carnivals during the time. She did a book of twins. All these sets of twins. Went to a twins festival, several twins festivals, and photographed people. Kind of interesting. So she was always just photographing people that weren't considered normal, is what her idea was, even though they were normal. But she just had this whole little idea about taking pictures.
So like twins are more rare, basically, is what she meant by that.
Right. And then when you talk about the carnival images, she photographed the bearded lady. She photographed, those kind of characters, at the largest, tallest man in the world, those kind of things she would photograph. Then this is an image called the Brown Sisters.
I've actually seen this whole series.
Have you?
I have.
Good.
Of all of these sisters. And it's a picture every year for like 40 years, isn't it? 4 decades?
Yes, good. You're definitely right. And that's what we were going to look at next. That's exactly what we're going to look at next. Nicholas Nixon is the photographer who did them. And they're called the Brown Sisters. The lady in the white, the third lady over, is his wife. And the other people in the image are his sisters, or her sisters. And this is a short interview from him about this work.
We're all aware of time passing and us not being aware of it while it's passing. I think that's something we all talk about. So seeing the sisters, for a lot of people, just gives them the sort of reliable marker that a year has passed. The first picture came because we would go down to visit BB's parents on weekends because they lived close to Boston. They lived in Connecticut. And it was kind of boring. There was a lot of socializing and stuff to do, and we were expected to show up for dinner, and I was bored a lot of the time. So I brought books to read, and kind of out of just a kind of friendly desperation, I said one day, I was photographing buildings. I said, let's take a picture. And they said, fine. And they liked it right away because their whole life, they'd been lined up to look good and look the same and to smile. That had been their whole experience of photography. And then I was like, no, just give me what you've got. They liked that. That was refreshing to them. And when they saw the picture, they liked it even more. So the next year, it was college graduation for Lori on the right. And they had on dresses, which didn't usually happen. And sure enough, I figured there'd be a lot of chit chat around that and it would get boring. So I brought the camera, again, in the trunk. And I said, let's take a picture again, because we all liked that picture last year. And so it really was seeing the first two that made me propose to do it forever. That what a year in time could look like would be that. We did have to negotiate the order. Early on in the series, some of the sisters wanted the order not to be the same. Mostly the two on the outside didn't like it that they were on the outside. They wanted to be in the middle. And so my very, very strong instinct would be that they should stay the same. This was maybe after 5 or 6, 7 years. And so the way I solved it was, I said, okay, fine, do it, line up any way you want, do variations, whatever, but then I'm going to take half my way. I'll show everybody the proofs, and then I swear if there's a better picture in your way, we'll consider changing. If not, my way. And so that killed that right away, because there were 2 that were really good that were my way, and none were any good the other way. So that, I mean, that was just luck. It could have worked the other way. But somehow you've got to be vulnerable. You've got to open, you've got to let yourself feel things. You've got to not keep up your wall, because that's, at least for me, not usually that interesting. I suppose that has to do with the sisters, because I'm asking them to open up as much as they're willing to, and that they're willing to, in varying degrees every year, I suppose is part of what's the drama and interesting. But because it's about a bigger chunk of time than we're used to having in photography. The subject is a bigger chunk of time, one of the subjects. I think it's the longer and bigger that is, the better.
So it's about time, basically. And I think that's what's interesting about his images. They are about time and the passing of time. What about how they change over the years? What do y'all think about that? Did any of your family take a certain picture every year in front of the Christmas tree in the same order? You know, does anybody do that already?
We used to.
Yeah. Anybody have it over like a 30-year period?
I mean, I take the same version of picture of my daughter the first day of school every year and the last day of school every year.
That's one of the things that people do today. Correct. That's exactly. A lot of parents do that.
And it's like in front of the same tree in our front yard, and you can see the
grows in the tree as well as.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. That's good. So people have been doing this for a while. So I think that's a great series of images. Can you see the Rolling Stone cover?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right. Y'all know who those 2 people are?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Why are they famous?
John Lennon.
Well,
He was a Beatle.
Does everybody else in the class know that? You know, I don't know. You know, that's an age thing. Yeah.
I also know who Annie Leibovitz is.
Annie, right. Annie Leibovitz is who we're talking about. Annie Leibovitz is probably the most commercially successful female photographer that there is. She used to be at 23, she got a job as photo editor for Rolling Stone magazine. Rolling Stone magazine, a music magazine, is still around, but she was that for like 20-something years. Then she went on to Vanity Fair as well. And so she took this portrait. This was the last portrait ever taken of John Lennon the day that he was shot. Oops. Hold on 1 second. Somebody's at my door. Sorry.
No worries.
All right, sorry about that. Somebody was leaving a package. I guess a neighbor got a package for me. All right. So anyway, this was taken on the day that he was shot. And notice she doesn't look happy. She was late for the shoot, and she didn't want to do this photo shoot at all. And so Annie Leibovitz was like, "Oh Lord, I got to do this, blah blah blah." And he said, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." And so he took off all of his clothes. And this is the image that resulted out of that. And it ended up on the cover. Great image, but you know, how would you ever think of doing this? You know what I'm saying? So sometimes it is that collaboration between the sitter and the artist that creates the best images. With that, Annie Leibovitz. So you've heard of, anybody else heard of Annie Leibovitz? Nope. Let's see what about her is important and why I wanted to talk about her. And Annie Leibovitz right there. All right, looking at this. So Annie Leibovitz is famous now that she's been photo editor for Vanity Fair for like 20, 30 years as well. She's famous. She shoots mostly famous people. Here, this image is one of the images she's taken. She worked for Rolling Stone at a young age, and all the covers for Vanity Fair she shoots. Anybody famous, she shot. Kate Blanchett. She did a whole series of images, Disney images. Did y'all see the famous series of images that were Disney characters that were done by famous people?
Yes.
She's famous for those. Annie Leibovitz, Disney, Disney Dream photos. She's famous for this whole series of images of famous people dressed up as Disney characters as well. Most of her productions, most of her shoots are very production heavy. Lights, camera, makeup, different things. They're not all dressed up as costumes. A lot of them are portraits like you saw that she does on covers, but she's famous for this kind of over-the-top type of image. But she's really a great photographer, somebody that you can look up. Most, current female photographer that there is. Then the next person I want to talk to is Cindy Sherman. Let's talk about Cindy Sherman. Cindy Sherman is famous for her characters. When she was in grad school, she was doing a project. She couldn't get people to model for her, so she decided to turn the camera on herself. And so she created a series of work called the Untitled Film Stills series. And those Untitled Film Stills were, they're representative of movies, but they weren't actual movies, but they look like they could be taken right out of a movie, scenes that could look like they could be taken out. And so they're really interesting. And all of her images since then have been self-portraits. And I'm going to let her talk about this right now. And this was on ARTT220, I believe.
Did you know they have press-on nails for pedicures?
Wait a minute.
I haven't tried them yet, but I'm really dying to try them. Isn't that crazy? I think I'm just wearing them myself for a party, just as a joke, I mean, except these aren't as obvious. These are maybe more obvious because they have little
She
polka dots
sometimes
on them
uses
and they just look
prosthetics and things to transform herself into
little
these
polka dots on her
characters
toes.
that she portrays, but they're all self-portraits. She's always the subject.
My work is not about kind of fantasizing about characters or situations. Some people, I think, have thought that the characters I do were, like as if I've always fantasized about being a femme fatale or whoever, in my film stills. So I don't think of it as that literal to me. When I'm doing the characters, I really don't feel like it's some sort of something that grows out of my fantasy, my own dreams. In college, when I would do it, I would, become a character and then sort of think, well, gee, here I am as Lucille Ball, and what do I do now? So then it became sort of a thing and a little more like performance. And I started to do it to going to parties sometimes. I remember once getting all in character and wanting to go to some opening and feeling like something was missing. And then I put a pillow under the dress and when there's a pregnant woman. When I moved to New York, I did it a few times, but it suddenly wasn't the same. I think because in the city, I felt like I needed my own sort of street armor or whatever,
to deal with the street and the people out on the street and the crazy people and the real crazy people who look like some of the characters I was looking like, and I didn't want to be confused, I guess, with them. The advantage of being in them myself is I can just play around. When I've experimented with other people in them as models, paid models or friends or family, I feel like I don't know what to tell them to do because I don't really know what it is I'm looking for until I see it. So I tend to sort of rush them through the whole process. And then I redo it myself, and it's like grueling. So
These series of the rich
even
people,
though I love to
like,
do it, it's much more work because I'm like
this series.
frustrated at
She did a
trying
series of
to
retirees
capture
in,
on film
in
something
Florida
that I
with
can't even
tans
articulate because I
and
don't really know
sunglasses and old people
what
with
it is
wrinkly skin.
I'm
She
looking
did a
for
series of
until I see
rich
it.
aristocrats in their furs and things, but she's dressed up in all these characters. Hilarious. She did a series of Greek gods where she was dressed up like Greek gods. But she's somebody that's really interesting in that she made her own way. She's included in this slideshow because she's probably the most, like I gave you the most famous certain people. She was the most famous contemporary female photographer. The first one that really was the first famous contemporary female photographer. Like since 1970 on, she was like the first woman who really made money as a fine art photographer. And that's why she's included in this particular presentation. And that's it for that particular, this lesson today. I know there was a lot of slides to go through, but I think I hit the key parts of famous people here in America and that did something. There are lots more people that did things, but that's pretty much an initial breakdown of key people. We'll study. I'm going to do another presentation on female photographers. I'll do another one of photography in East Asia and India. I'll do another one on in Africa, and so I'll do other areas and how photography was influenced in those areas as well. Hopefully you'll learn about some different people that'll inspire you to make different images. You'll have a couple of projects later on in the semester that you'll get to make up a narrative or a story, and you'll get to do your own. So, and now that we're in COVID times, you may have to be your own model. You never know, right? So, any questions about anything or anybody that I've showed today?
No.
Anybody that you absolutely hated that I showed today?
I thought it was all interesting. It was a little disturbing with the photographer that did the Civil War photos moving the dead bodies.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
That
a
made
little
me-
interesting.
That made me think, is it, because I've seen things and I've heard things, like, is it true that way back then that they would they'd prop up dead bodies and photograph them before they buried them?
Oh yeah, I'll show you another photographer who photographed dead bodies. And there was a thing called spirit photography too, where you try to photograph where people would photograph deceased, photograph supposedly ghosts. Supposedly.
Yeah. But I've seen pictures of
Oh yeah, yes, post-mortem photography is what it's called.
they set them up in a chair.
Oh yeah,
whatever, and
or if your baby died in birth,
Yeah.
they would take a picture. They'd have somebody hiding with a sheet over them or a black thing, and they'd hold the baby up.
Yeah.
Right, and take a picture of them. And they're covered, so you're only supposed to see the baby, but it's a person underneath it because you see the shape. Yeah, there's a lot of photography. Yeah, that was done.
So creepy.
And there's another photographer. I think it's on the same slideshow that I have, where I show old postmortem photography. Then I show new postmortem photography of showing. There's a guy who photographs people in their caskets, straight down, and stiff.
Interesting.
So you can photograph anything, right?
Well, I mean, can
When I worked in the photo lab at Walgreens, I saw it all.
I'll bet. All right. Let's see. No other questions or anything? So Tuesday. Everybody knows what's due on Tuesday.
Yes.
8 pictures and a drawing.
Correct. I also have, I recorded this, so I'll post it. I've been trying to keep the recordings posted, updated. And I think we're good to go. I think you're good. Those people, most of those people that we talked about, especially the ones that I did videos on, will probably be something on the final. Just a hint. All right. That's, I told you no surprises. So just giving you a heads up. If that's going to be it, y'all are good to go, and I'll have a great weekend. Don't forget to shoot those 10 images and make your drawing, and have those ready for class on Tuesday.
Awesome.
Talk to you later. Y'all have a great one.
Bye.